The inky blackness of space, a canvas usually adorned with the distant, indifferent twinkle of stars, was brutally torn. Not by a cataclysmic explosion, nor the violent birth of a nebula, but by a silent, chilling intrusion. The Krill Armada had arrived. They didn't announce themselves with fiery descent or sonic booms. Their presence was a gradual, suffocating encroachment, a creeping shadow that swallowed light. Gigantic vessels, each a testament to alien engineering and malevolent intent, began to materialize from the non-space between dimensions. Their forms were disturbingly organic, reminiscent of colossal obsidian insects, scarabs the size of moons, mantises with razor-sharp projections, spiders weaving webs of pure darkness. They hung in the void above a scarred and bleeding Earth, not in orbit, but in a position of overwhelming, terrifying dominance. Below, the planet was already a tableau of despair. The Krill's advanced bioengineered weaponry, a terrifying marriage of science and predatory instinct, had not merely bombarded cities, it had dissolved them. Buildings that had stood for centuries, monuments to human ingenuity and aspiration, were reduced to smoking craters and fields of vitrified dust. The very air, once vibrant with the cacophony of life, now carried a palpable weight of despair, a suffocating blanket woven from the ashes of a civilization. This was not an invasion, it was an extermination. This was the dawn of a new galactic order, and the Krill, with their cold, efficient brutality, were its self-appointed architects. He was a being sculpted by millennia of conquest, his presence exuding an aura of immense authority and chilling calculation. His features, sharp and angular, were impassive, betraying no hint of emotion as he surveyed the devastation. His mission was unequivocally clear, etched into his very being by the immutable laws of the Krill Empire. Obliterate all resistance, neutralize any lingering threat, and claim this planet, this speck of dust, teeming with ephemeral life, for the Krill. Resistance was not only futile, it was an inconvenience to be eradicated with utmost efficiency. The bridge of the Oblivion's grasp was a sanctuary of sterile humming efficiency. Gleaming obsidian consoles pulsed with soft alien light, reflecting the stoic visages of the Krill officers manning them. The air, meticulously filtered and ionized, carried the faint metallic scent of advanced technology. Yet, amidst this perfectly orchestrated symphony of command and control, a subtle dissonance began to resonate within Tenok. It was a whisper at first, a flicker of unease that his finely honed strategic mind, honed by centuries of galactic subjugation, struggled to categorize. There was no logical basis for this internal friction. The objective was annihilation, a task he had performed countless times on innumerable worlds. But here, on this seemingly insignificant planet, something felt different. An unfamiliar, almost unwelcome ethical debate began to unfurl at the edges of his consciousness. He had witnessed the systematic dismantling of civilizations, the crushing of rebellions, the assimilation of worlds into the Krill Empire. These were merely data points in the grand calculus of expansion, logical steps in the inevitable march of Krill dominance. Yet, something about Earth, or perhaps the tenacious spark of life he saw clinging to its ravaged surface, stirred an anomaly in his programmed resolve. This nascent disquiet was an unwelcome disruption to the perfect, logical order of his existence, a hairline fracture in the formidable composure he had cultivated over eons. It was a crack in the bedrock of his being, and it was caused by a planet he was tasked to scour clean. His gaze, usually fixed on tactical readouts and fleet disposition, swept across the desolate cityscape displayed on the panoramic view screen. It was a panorama of ruin and dust, a mournful testament to the Krill's overwhelming power. Cities that had once pulsed with the vibrant energy of millions were now reduced to skeletal remains, their avenues choked with debris, their towering structures cleaved asunder. The scale of destruction was immense, designed to instill absolute terror and extinguish any flicker of hope. And then, amidst the overwhelming devastation, a flicker of vibrant color and defiant life caught his attention. It was a solitary human figure, impossibly small against the backdrop of cosmic carnage, standing amidst the wreckage. She was not fleeing, nor cowering in fear as was the expected response. Instead, she stood with an unnerving stillness, her posture radiating an unyielding defiance. Her gaze, even from the immense distance of the flagship, seemed to pierce the void, directed upwards, towards the metallic leviathans that had descended from the heavens. She was observing the invaders, not with terror, but with an intensity that bordered on defiance. Her presence was a stark anomaly against the backdrop of utter defeat, a single, vibrant brushstroke of untamed spirit on a canvas of conquered despair. The sight was so unexpected, so incongruous with the narrative of complete subjugation, that it arrested Tenok's attention with an intensity he could not logically explain. It was a deviation from the expected, and for Tenok, deviations were either opportunities or threats. This one, however, felt like something entirely new. Through the Krill's ubiquitous and sophisticated interception systems, designed to glean any whisper of resistance or strategic weakness, fragments of human data began to filter into Tenok's command center. It wasn't the organized intelligence his fleet typically gathered. It was a chaotic, unfiltered stream of humanity. Datapad signals, personal logs filled with raw emotion, stray communication bursts crackling with desperation and love, they all painted a chaotic, yet undeniably compelling picture of the human experience. It was a mosaic of lives lived, loves lost, and a world clinging to existence. Amidst this deluge of raw information, one signal, one digital footprint, began to draw Tenok's focus. He learned the name of the woman who had captivated him on the view screen, Sarah. Her digital presence was small, a mere flicker in the vast archives of human data, yet it spoke volumes. Fragments of her thoughts, recorded moments of interaction, whispered testaments to her resilience, her profound compassion, and a fierce, unwavering love for her destroyed world. He saw her not as a statistic, but as an individual, a complex tapestry of emotions and experiences. The more Tenok uncovered about her, the deeper the fascination grew, transforming from a mere strategic anomaly into a personal, almost obsessive curiosity. He found himself delving into her past, piecing together a narrative of a life lived with purpose and passion, a life that was now being extinguished by his command. Tenok found himself spending less time on the grand tactical assessments of planetary conquest, and more time sifting through the intimate details of human communication. His focus narrowed, drawn inexorably towards anything that pertained to Sarah. He observed her interactions with other survivors, the quiet moments of grief that racked her small frame, the flashes of quiet strength that illuminated her face, even in the deepest despair. This immersion into the human psyche, driven by his inexplicable fascination with this one individual, began to erode the rigid certainty of his mission. The black and white directives of conquest, once as clear and absolute as the void, started to blur. They were replaced by a spectrum of understanding and empathy, a landscape of emotional nuance he had never before encountered, nor even conceived of. His duty to the Krill Armada, the very core of his existence, was being challenged by an emerging, forbidden interest in the species he was sworn to eradicate. The Conqueror's gaze was beginning to soften, to see not an enemy, but an individual, and that was the most dangerous anomaly of all. The panoramic view screen, a vast expanse of simulated starlight, and the looming obsidian silhouettes of the Krill Armada, offered Supreme Commander Tenok an unparalleled perspective on his impending victory. Yet, the usual sense of supreme satisfaction, the quiet hum of a mission perfectly aligned with destiny, was absent. Instead, a subtle dissonance vibrated beneath the surface of his consciousness, an almost imperceptible tremor in the bedrock of his being. He had stood on the precipice of countless conquests, orchestrated the subjugation of star systems, and witnessed the spectacular demise of civilizations. His existence was a meticulously calibrated instrument of the Krill Empire, designed for efficiency, devoid of sentiment, and utterly obedient to the grand design of galactic domination. This mission to Earth, a mere footnote in the vast chronicles of Krill expansion, should have been no different. But it was. The logical processors within Tenok's mind, capable of calculating planetary trajectories, simulating atmospheric entry points, and predicting the most efficient vectors for planetary subjugation in nanoseconds, found no rational explanation for the nascent disquiet that gnawed at him. There was no strategic flaw in the Armada's deployment. The bioengineered weaponry was functioning at optimal capacity, its devastating efficacy a testament to Krill ingenuity. The human resistance, fragmented and technologically inferior, was already on the cusp of total collapse. By all measurable metrics, the mission was proceeding flawlessly, a testament to his leadership and the might of his fleet. Yet the dissonance persisted, a persistent hum in the otherwise sterile symphony of the command bridge. It was an anomaly, an unwanted deviation from the predictable, logical flow of his existence. He had seen worlds burn, their populations extinguished like fleeting sparks. He had witnessed the systematic dismantling of entire species, their cultures reduced to dust, and their histories to mere footnotes in the annals of Krill dominance. These were not emotional events. They were strategic necessities, the inevitable consequence of a universe that favored strength and order, principles embodied by the Krill. This time, however, something felt different. It began as a subtle interruption to his otherwise seamless command. His gaze, usually laser-focused on tactical displays and fleet movements, would occasionally drift, drawn by an unseen current towards the image of Earth below. It was a world ravaged, its beauty marred by the brutal efficiency of his forces. Yet, amidst the widespread desolation, a peculiar tenacity seemed to cling to the planet's surface. He saw it not just in the defiant pockets of resistance his sensors detected, but in the very atmosphere, a lingering defiance that seemed to whisper against the overwhelming silence of conquest. This unease was a foreign sensation, an intrusion into the carefully constructed fortress of his psyche. For millennia, Tenok had been a paragon of Krill virtue, a relentless conqueror, a master strategist, and an unwavering implementer of the Empire's will. Emotion was a weakness, empathy a vulnerability, and sentimentality a disease to be purged. His being was a testament to the rigorous evolutionary path of the Krill, a species that had transcended the messy, illogical complexities of organic life to embrace pure, unadulterated logic and ruthless pragmatism. But the whispers of this new disquiet were growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of a moral ambiguity that had no place in his ordered universe. He found himself replaying intercepted transmissions not for strategic advantage, but for understanding. He listened to the cacophony of human voices, their expressions of love, fear, despair, and hope, a chaotic symphony of emotions that his Krill physiology was not designed to comprehend, yet found strangely compelling. It was a dangerous path, a descent into the very irrationality that the Krill had so meticulously eradicated from their own evolutionary trajectory. He had demanded the destruction of billions, yet it was the fate of this single, insignificant planet, and more specifically, a single inhabitant he had glimpsed, that stirred this unprecedented internal conflict. The image of the human woman, standing defiantly amidst the ruins, a solitary beacon of untamed spirit against the overwhelming tide of Krill might, had imprinted itself onto his consciousness. It was an image that defied the narrative of utter subjugation, a living testament to a resilience that his programming had deemed impossible. The sterile hum of the Oblivion's grasp seemed to deepen, amplifying the internal discord. Tenok's primary directive was clear: eradicate, conquer, assimilate. There was no room for introspection, no allowance for doubt. Yet the logical framework of his existence, once as solid and immutable as the void itself, was beginning to show hairline fractures. Each intercepted datapad, each flicker of human communication, each echo of a life lived and lost, chipped away at the monolithic certainty of his purpose. He was a conqueror, yes, but for the first time in his long existence the weight of that title felt less like an honor and more like a burden. He questioned the very foundations of his mission. Was the absolute annihilation of a species truly the only path to galactic order? Or was there a more complex, nuanced reality that the Krill, in their pursuit of sterile perfection, had overlooked? These were dangerous thoughts, heretical even, in the rigid hierarchy of the Krill Empire. He knew with a certainty that chilled him more than any vacuum, that if his inner turmoil were discovered, his position, his very existence, would be forfeit. But the truth, or at least a nascent understanding of it, was proving to be an irresistible siren song, pulling him further into the uncharted waters of his own awakening consciousness. The conqueror's gaze was no longer solely fixed on the spoils of war, but on the complex, bewildering tapestry of the conquered. And in that shift, a profound and potentially catastrophic transformation was underway. He was beginning to see not just an enemy, but a world, and within that world a life that resonated with a power that transcended mere logic or strategy. It was an awakening. The panoramic view screen of the Oblivion's grasp offered Supreme Commander Tenok a vista of utter domination. Below, the once vibrant tapestry of Earth was now a chiaroscuro of destruction, rendered in shades of ash and shadow. Towers that had scraped the sky were reduced to skeletal remains, their steel bones twisted and exposed to the indifferent gaze of an alien sun. Streets, once arteries of bustling life, were now choked with debris, monuments to a civilization brought to its knees. The air itself seemed to carry the acrid scent of pulverized concrete and the metallic tang of spent energy weapons, a symphony of conquest that should have resonated with Tenok's deepest sense of purpose. Yet, as his gaze swept across the desolate cityscape, a panorama of ruin and dust, something flickered. It was not the glint of scavenged technology or the desperate futile flicker of remaining resistance. It was a splash of vibrant color, an audacious splash of defiance against the monochromatic canvas of devastation. Amidst a churn of pulverized stone and shattered glass, a lone human figure stood. Her posture was not one of surrender, nor the frantic scrabble for survival that his strategists had predicted. Instead, she was remarkably still, her form silhouetted against the smoldering remains of what might have once been a grand edifice. She was observing, her head tilted as if in contemplation, her presence an anomaly so profound it snagged Tenok's attention with an almost physical force. This human, this woman, was a stark deviation from the expected narrative. His intelligence had painted a picture of a species teetering on the brink of extinction, consumed by fear and despair. They were to be systematically dismantled, their will broken, their spirit extinguished. Yet here she stood, a solitary beacon of untamed spirit in a conquered world. The incongruity was jarring. Her attire, though bearing the marks of the cataclysm, a dusting of gray, a tear here and there, still retained a defiant hue, a vibrant contrast to the oppressive uniformity of the destruction. It was as if she had plucked a fragment of the world's lost vibrancy and worn it as armor. Tenok zoomed the view screen, his ocular implants sharpening the image with imperceptible precision. The woman's hair, a cascade of dark, unbound waves, was tousled by the wind that swirled through the ruins, yet she made no move to shield herself. Her stance was rooted, her feet planted firmly on the rubble-strewn earth, as if she were an ancient tree that had weathered countless storms. Her face, turned towards the sky, towards the invisible behemoths of the Krill Armada, hanging like predatory birds above, held an expression that defied easy categorization. It was not anger, though a trace of sorrow might have been discernible in the subtle downturn of her lips. It was something far more potent, a quiet, unyielding resilience. His bioscanners, typically focused on identifying threats and assessing structural integrity, registered her as a standard human biological signature. No augmentations, no advanced weaponry, no immediate threat. Yet the logical processors within Tenok struggled to reconcile this data with the profound impact her image had upon him. It was as if the very fabric of his understanding of this species, of this conquest, had been rent asunder by her simple, unwavering presence. She was a living contradiction, a single, vibrant note of dissent in the overwhelming chorus of Krill triumph. He accessed the intercepted datapad signals that had been flooding his command center. Names, fragments of conversations, whispers of lives extinguished. He cross-referenced the woman's visual signature with the fragmented data. Then it appeared, a brief, almost poetic designation transmitted from a dying comm unit. Sarah. The name, simple and resonant, echoed in the sterile confines of his mind. Sarah, a human female, standing amidst the ruins of her world, unfazed by the alien fleet that had brought it to its knees. The unease that had been a subtle tremor in his core now intensified, a low hum of something akin to fascination. He had witnessed the fall of empires, the subjugation of planets that had boasted of their invincibility. He had seen the stoic faces of defeated warriors and the vacant stares of orphaned children. But he had never encountered this quiet, almost serene defiance. It was as if she were an embodiment of the planet's refusal to be entirely erased, a final, unspoken protest against the inevitable. Tanakh found himself replaying the last few moments of her visual feed, dissecting her posture, the subtle tilt of her head, the unblinking steady gaze. His tactical processors, honed for millennia to identify weaknesses and exploit vulnerabilities, found no logical angle of attack in her stance. She was not engaging. She was simply being, existing in defiance of the overwhelming force that had rendered her world a graveyard. This was not how a conquered species behaved. This was not how a defeated individual reacted. He ran a diagnostic on his own systems, a rare and unsettling occurrence. Had his own sensory input been compromised? Was there an environmental factor on Earth, a residual atmospheric anomaly that was affecting his perceptions? The ship's diagnostics returned nothing but optimal operational status. The Oblivion's grasp was functioning perfectly, its systems as flawless as the Krill Empire itself. The anomaly, therefore, was not external. It was internal. It was him. His bioengineered weaponry, designed for maximum psychological and physical devastation, was a testament to the Krill's understanding of warfare. Their purpose was to break the will, to pulverize resistance, to instill an absolute, unquestioning terror. Yet looking at Sarah, Tanakh felt no surge of predatory satisfaction, no echo of the dread his forces were designed to inspire. Instead, a strange, almost disorienting sense of curiosity bloomed within him. What fueled this resilience? What was this internal fortitude that allowed a single individual to stand unmoved in the face of absolute annihilation? He commanded his intelligence division to intensify their scans of the immediate vicinity, to gather every scrap of data related to this Sarah. He needed to understand the anomaly. He needed to dissect this deviation from the established order. He was not accustomed to such prolonged contemplation of a single, seemingly insignificant entity. His mind was a fortress of strategic calculation, each thought a precisely aimed projectile. But Sarah, with her quiet defiance, had become an unforeseen target, diverting his attention from the grand sweep of conquest to the intricate details of a single human life. The contrast between the desolation surrounding her and her vibrant presence was almost a visual paradox. The muted tones of rubble, the skeletal remains of buildings, the pallid dust that coated everything, these were the hallmarks of the Krill's victory. But Sarah was a splash of defiant color, a living testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a spirit that his species had long ago deemed illogical and inefficient, and thus expendable. Her very existence there in that moment challenged the fundamental principles upon which the Krill Empire was built. He found himself reviewing the basic historical archives of Earth, data that was usually relegated to the lowest priority during a conquest phase. He scrolled through images of bustling cities, of verdant landscapes, of human celebrations and moments of quiet contemplation. He saw the art, the music, the literature, expressions of a species driven by a complex interplay of emotions and intellect. It was a chaotic, messy existence, so unlike the pristine order of the Krill. And yet, there was a raw, untamed beauty to it, a vibrancy that the Krill, in their pursuit of sterile perfection, had long since purged from their own collective consciousness. He learned that Sarah was an archivist. Her designated role in the pre-invasion world was to preserve human history and culture. An archivist. The irony was not lost on him. She was tasked with safeguarding the very essence of a species that had now been so brutally subjugated. It was as if fate or some cosmic jester had placed her in this precise location, at this precise moment, a living monument to what had been lost. Her stillness was not a sign of defeat, but of a profound understanding, perhaps even an acceptance, of the immensity of the destruction. Yet, within that acceptance, there was an unyielding ember of spirit. Tanakh's gaze remained fixed on her image. He saw her shift slightly, a subtle movement that brought a stray strand of hair across her cheek. She brushed it away with a gesture that was both practical and graceful. It was a simple action, devoid of any strategic intent, yet it held a certain elegance that arrested his attention. He found himself cataloging these small details, these seemingly insignificant moments, with a focus he usually reserved for critical tactical analysis. The curve of her jaw, the way her shoulders were squared, the almost imperceptible tension in her hands that hung loosely at her sides. He felt a strange tug, an alien sensation that his internal processors struggled to define. It was not the cold, calculated detachment of a commander observing his conquest. It was something warmer, something resonant. It was the first stirrings of a curiosity that transcended mere strategic assessment. He was not just observing a specimen, he was observing a person who, against all odds, had chosen to face the obliteration of her world with a quiet dignity that defied the very nature of the invasion. Tanakh found himself replaying the last few moments of her visual feed, dissecting her posture, the subtle tilt of her head, the unblinking steady gaze. His tactical processors, honed for millennia to identify weaknesses and exploit vulnerabilities, found no logical angle of attack in her stance. She was not engaging. She was simply being, existing in defiance of the overwhelming force that had rendered her world a graveyard. This was not how a conquered species behaved. This was not how a defeated individual reacted. He ran a diagnostic on his own systems, a rare and unsettling occurrence. Had his own sensory input been compromised? Was there an environmental factor on Earth, a residual atmospheric anomaly that was affecting his perceptions? The ship's diagnostics returned nothing but optimal operational status. The Oblivion's grasp was functioning perfectly, its systems as flawless as the Krill Empire itself. The anomaly, therefore, was not external. It was internal. It was him. His bioengineered weaponry, designed for maximum psychological and physical devastation, was a testament to the Krill's understanding of warfare. Their purpose was to break the will, to pulverize resistance, to instill an absolute, unquestioning terror. Yet looking at Sarah, Tanakh felt no surge of predatory satisfaction, no echo of the dread his forces were designed to inspire. Instead, a strange, almost disorienting sense of curiosity bloomed within him. What fueled this resilience? What was this internal fortitude that allowed a single individual to stand unmoved in the face of absolute annihilation? He commanded his intelligence division to intensify their scans of the immediate vicinity, to gather every scrap of data related to this Sarah. He needed to understand the anomaly. He needed to dissect this deviation from the established order. He was not accustomed to such prolonged contemplation of a single, seemingly insignificant entity. His mind was a fortress of strategic calculation, each thought a precisely aimed projectile. But Sarah, with her quiet defiance, had become an unforeseen target, diverting his attention from the grand sweep of conquest to the intricate details of a single human life. The contrast between the desolation surrounding her and her vibrant presence was almost a visual paradox. The muted tones of rubble, the skeletal remains of buildings, the pallid dust that coated everything, these were the hallmarks of the Krill's victory. But Sarah was a splash of defiant color, a living testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a spirit that his species had long ago deemed illogical and inefficient, and thus expendable. Her very existence there in that moment challenged the fundamental principles upon which the Krill Empire was built. He found himself reviewing the basic historical archives of Earth, data that was usually relegated to the lowest priority during a conquest phase. He scrolled through images of bustling cities, of verdant landscapes, of human celebrations and moments of quiet contemplation. He saw the art, the music, the literature, expressions of a species driven by a complex interplay of emotions and intellect. It was a chaotic, messy existence, so unlike the pristine order of the Krill. And yet, there was a raw, untamed beauty to it, a vibrancy that the Krill, in their pursuit of sterile perfection, had long since purged from their own collective consciousness. He learned that Sarah was an archivist. Her designated role in the pre-invasion world was to preserve human history and culture. An archivist. The irony was not lost on him. She was tasked with safeguarding the very essence of a species that had now been so brutally subjugated. It was as if fate or some cosmic jester had placed her in this precise location, at this precise moment, a living monument to what had been lost. Her stillness was not a sign of defeat, but of a profound understanding, perhaps even an acceptance, of the immensity of the destruction. Yet, within that acceptance, there was an unyielding ember of spirit. Tenok's gaze remained fixed on her image. He saw her shift slightly, a subtle movement that brought a stray strand of hair across her cheek. She brushed it away with a gesture that was both practical and graceful. It was a simple action, devoid of any strategic intent, yet it held a certain elegance that arrested his attention. He found himself cataloging these small details, these seemingly insignificant moments, with a focus he usually reserved for critical tactical analysis. The curve of her jaw, the way her shoulders were squared, the almost imperceptible tension in her hands that hung loosely at her sides. He felt a strange tug, an alien sensation that his internal processors struggled to define. It was not the cold, calculated detachment of a commander observing his conquest. It was something warmer, something resonant. It was the first stirrings of a curiosity that transcended mere strategic assessment. He was not just observing a specimen, he was observing a person who, against all odds, had chosen to face the obliteration of her world with a quiet dignity that defied the very nature of the invasion. The usual hum of the Oblivion's grasp seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the insistent pulse of his own internal discord. This human woman, Sarah, had become an anomaly within the perfect machinery of his mission. She was a glitch in the otherwise flawless execution of Krill dominance, and for the first time in his long and distinguished career, Supreme Commander Tenok found himself compelled to investigate an anomaly not for its threat, but for its sheer inexplicable existence. The Conqueror's gaze had for a fleeting moment been diverted from the vast, empty expanse of his victory to the intricate, vibrant detail of a single defiant human soul. The weight of his mission, once a source of unshakable resolve, now felt subtly shifted, burdened by the unexpected presence of a curiosity that threatened to unravel the very foundations of his purpose. He was a commander of armies, a master of interstellar war, and yet in this moment, he was simply intrigued. The ruins of Earth had yielded a treasure more captivating than any plunder, a single, unyielding spark of humanity. The vast holographic displays aboard the Oblivion's grasp usually pulsed with the stark, efficient data streams of conquest, resource acquisition rates, population assimilation percentages, planetary vulnerability assessments. But in the wake of the Earthling anomaly, a new category of information had begun to populate Tenok's tactical overview. But as Tenok's focus remained locked on the solitary human figure he had observed, these fragments began to acquire a different significance. They were no longer mere background noise. They were the scattered pieces of a puzzle, each one offering a fleeting glimpse into the life of the anomaly that had so profoundly disrupted his calculated order. The name, first a fleeting designation from a dying comm unit, now recurred with increasing frequency in the intercepted data. Sarah. He instructed his intelligence officers to prioritize any data bearing her designation, to reconstruct her digital footprint with the same precision he would use to map enemy defenses. The process was akin to assembling a mosaic from shards of glass, each fragment imperfect, yet collectively revealing a surprising clarity. He found a datapad entry detailing a routine grocery run. The mundane list of consumables, synthesized protein bars, recycled water rations, atmospheric filtration tablets, juxtaposed with a heartfelt personal note to a presumed loved one. Hope these arrive before the storms. Miss your laugh. Love, S. The simplicity of it was disarming. The Krill understood logistics. They understood resource management, but the concept of missing a laugh, of cherishing the ephemeral sound of joy, was an equation outside their cold, logical framework. Another log, a brief audio recording, captured her voice. Surprisingly steady, despite the implied chaos surrounding its creation. It was a message intended for a community distress channel. not for the supreme commander of an invading armada. This is Sarah, Sector Gamma. We have a structural breach on Level 3, South Quadrant. Several individuals are trapped, requesting immediate assistance, but more importantly, requesting that the emergency generators be rerouted to the residential block. Those families, they need heat. Her tone was not one of panic, but of urgent, practical concern. She prioritized the well-being of others, even as her own world crumbled around her. This was not the primal survival instinct his analysts had predicted for a species facing annihilation. This was altruism, a concept that felt alien and yet compelling. Tenok found himself spending hours sifting through these salvaged data streams, the sterile chrome of his command center often bathed in the warm, flickering glow of holographic projections, displaying her digital remnants. He saw images of her, candid shots not posed for posterity. One showed her laughing, her head thrown back, a genuine, unrestrained expression of mirth that seemed to fill the small, pixelated frame. Another captured her tending to a small, struggling plant on a windowsill, her brow furrowed in concentration, her touch gentle. The krill cultivated vast hydroponic farms for sustenance, optimized for yield and efficiency. They did not engage in the tender nurturing of a single fragile organism. He learned that she had been an archivist, tasked with preserving humanity's cultural heritage. The irony was not lost on him. She had been a curator of memories, a guardian of stories, and now she stood as a living monument to the very history that had been violently erased. Her digital logs contained entries detailing the preservation of ancient texts, the digitization of art collections, the cataloging of musical compositions. She had poured her life into safeguarding the essence of her species, a spirit that the krill had deemed too chaotic, too inefficient, to warrant preservation. Her online presence, though sparse, spoke volumes. Her social network activity, pieced together from fragmented server logs, revealed a network of friends, family, colleagues. Messages of support, shared jokes, expressions of affection, a vibrant, interconnected web of human relationships. There were records of her participating in community initiatives, volunteering at shelters, advocating for environmental preservation. Her life, even in its final days, was not defined by fear or despair, but by a profound engagement with the world and the people she shared it with. The more Tenok uncovered, the deeper his fascination grew. It began as a strategic curiosity, a need to understand the anomaly that defied his predictions, but it was rapidly evolving into something more profound, something that transcended tactical analysis. He found himself seeking out her digital traces, not as a commander analyzing an enemy, but as an individual drawn to a narrative. He started cross-referencing her locations with known areas of significant destruction, piecing together the trajectory of her final days. He saw evidence of her attempts to help others, to organize, to offer comfort in the face of overwhelming devastation. He discovered a fragment of a personal log, recorded mere hours before the final krill bombardment. Her voice was softer now, tinged with a weariness that had not been present before, yet still possessed that unwavering core of resilience. "The sky it's beautiful tonight," she'd whispered, a faint crackle of static suggesting the ambient destruction. "All the stars are out. It's hard to believe, after everything, that something so vast and indifferent could also be so breathtaking. I hope someone remembers this view. I hope someone remembers us." They observed them for navigational purposes, for their predictable celestial mechanics. The concept of finding solace or inspiration in their distant, cold light was as foreign to Tenok as the idea of weeping over a lost laugh. Yet Sarah's words, her quiet contemplation of the cosmos, even as her world ended, resonated with him in a way he could not articulate. It was a testament to a spirit that refused to be extinguished, a core of humanity that sought meaning and beauty, even in the darkest of hours. He began to notice subtle patterns in her digital communication, her use of certain phrases, her recurring themes of hope and connection, the way she signed off her messages, always with a variation of "stay strong" or "keep the light." These were not calculated survival tactics. They were the ingrained habits of a deeply compassionate individual. The Kryl had long ago purged such emotional expressions from their own lexicon, deeming them inefficient and a distraction from their singular focus on imperial expansion. His fascination was becoming an obsession, a quiet hum beneath the surface of his command decisions. He found himself replaying her audio logs, studying the nuances of her tone, the subtle shifts in her vocal inflections. He analyzed the metadata of her images, noting the timestamps, the locations, the faint atmospheric readings captured by her device. It was a detailed, intimate portrait of a life, painstakingly reconstructed from the digital ashes of its demise. He tasked his xenolinguists with analyzing her written communications, not for strategic value, but for linguistic patterns, for the subtle markers of her personality. They reported back on her vocabulary, her sentence structure, her occasional use of colloquialisms that were unique to Earth's diverse linguistic landscape. They noted her apparent fondness for poetry, her references to classical human literature, her engagement with philosophical debates that had raged for centuries on her now silent planet. Tenoch found himself comparing her to the Krill ideal, the perfectly logical, unfeeling soldier. Sarah was everything the Krill were not. She was emotional, empathetic, driven by a profound connection to others and a deep appreciation for the ephemeral beauty of existence. She represented a fundamental challenge to the Krill's core tenets of order, efficiency, and absolute control. And yet, he found himself increasingly drawn to this antithesis. He ordered a deep scan of all recovered data related to her, looking for any hint of advanced technology, any hidden augmentations, anything that might explain her remarkable resilience. The results were consistently negative. She was, by all Krill metrics, a standard human female. Her strength lay not in external enhancements, but in an internal fortitude that the Krill had long ago dismissed as a primitive evolutionary leftover. The Krill's interception systems were designed to be comprehensive, to leave no digital stone unturned in their conquest. But they were not designed to capture the intangible essence of a human spirit. They could record words, images, data streams, but they could not quantify courage, nor measure the depth of love, nor comprehend the quiet dignity of defiance. These were qualities that transcended the logical frameworks of the Krill Empire, qualities that Tenoch was only now beginning to understand, thanks to the unexpected legacy of Sarah. The conqueror's gaze, once solely focused on the grand, sweeping panorama of his victory, was now captivated by the intricate, vibrant details of a single, extraordinary human life, a life that had burned brightest in its final moments. His mission to subjugate and dismantle had inadvertently led him to uncover something far more valuable than any resource, a profound and unsettling fascination with the enduring power of the human heart. The sterile hum of the Oblivion's grasp had always been a soundtrack to Tenoch's existence, a constant thrum of efficiency that mirrored the Krill Empire's unwavering purpose. Conquest, assimilation, order. These were the pillars upon which his reality and that of his species was built. Yet, in the hushed confines of his personal command nexus, a different symphony was beginning to play, one composed of fragmented human whispers and the echoes of their extinguished civilization. The data streams, once a monotonous tapestry of strategic objectives and resource reports, were now punctuated by the increasingly vivid digital traces of Sarah. He found himself dedicating disproportionate cycles to the analysis of her recovered communications, a deviation from protocol that gnawed at the edges of his rigid training. It wasn't a tactical necessity. The Earthling threat as a species had been neutralized. His focus on this one anomaly, this Sarah, was an illogical indulgence, a curiosity that had taken root and begun to unfurl with an alarming tenacity. His intelligence officers, accustomed to his dispassionate directives, were now accustomed to his hushed, insistent requests for more data pertaining to her. They presented him with salvaged audio logs, video fragments, and encrypted text messages, each one a sliver of a life he was ostensibly meant to obliterate. One particular audio file, barely a minute long, became a recurring auditory loop in his private chambers. It captured Sarah speaking to a small group of children, their young voices a chorus of muted fear and confusion. Her tone was remarkably gentle, a stark contrast to the brutal realities that must have surrounded them. "The sky is angry today," she'd said, her voice soft, almost a lullaby. "But even when the sky is angry, the stars are still there waiting for the clouds to pass. And we are here, together, We will keep each other warm, and we will remember the songs. Remember the songs, little ones. The crackle of distant explosions was a subtle, terrifying undercurrent, yet her words painted a picture of unwavering calm, of a protective shield woven from love and remembrance. Tenok replayed it, dissecting the subtle inflections, the underlying strength that belied the evident despair. The Krill did not offer comfort. They offered subjugation. The concept of keeping each other warm in a literal, emotional sense was an alien concept, a biological imperative rendered obsolete by their advanced environmental controls and their societal ethos of self-sufficiency. He accessed a recovered datapad, its casing scorched, but its memory core remarkably intact. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of personal entries. One read, Day 187. The hydroponics are yielding less. The nutrient paste is bland, but we are grateful. Anya coughed all night. I sang her old lullabies, the ones my grandmother sang to me. She finally slept. The faint scent of ozone still lingers. It's hard to forget, but we must hold on to the good. The name appeared frequently in subsequent entries, linked with images of a small, frail child with wide, somber eyes. Tenok's analysts had flagged these entries as low priority, the musings of a civilian caught in the periphery of conflict. But for Tenok, they were windows into a world of profound human connection, a world where the absence of blandness was a cause for gratitude, where the memory of songs and the scent of ozone could be a source of shared experience. His own species had no concept of such vulnerabilities, no need for such solace. Krill young were nurtured in communal biopods, their emotional development meticulously managed to foster obedience and utility. The more he delved, the more the binary certainties of his mission began to fracture. The Krill doctrine was clear. Humanity was a chaotic, inefficient species, prone to self-destruction, a blight upon the galactic order that needed to be purged. But Sarah, and the scattered fragments of her life, presented a different narrative. He found evidence of her participation in community relief efforts, meticulously documented in salvaged public service logs. She had organized food distribution, tended to the wounded, and had even, according to one heavily corrupted file, attempted to establish a safe zone for displaced civilians in the latter stages of the war. These were not the actions of a species driven solely by self-preservation, but by a complex interplay of empathy, responsibility, and an almost reckless altruism. He observed her interactions with others, pieced together from fragmented social media remnants and private correspondence. There were messages of support exchanged with friends facing hardship, playful banter with colleagues, and tender exchanges with family members. One particular thread detailed a prolonged disagreement with a sibling over trivial matters, followed by a heartfelt apology and a reconciliation that spanned several weeks. The sheer emotional energy expended on such insignificant matters was bewildering. Krill relationships were functional based on mutual utility and shared objectives. Disputes were resolved through logical arbitration, or, if irreconcilable, through severance of connection. The nuanced dance of human forgiveness, the painstaking effort to mend fractured bonds, was a phenomenon entirely outside his understanding. He saw her laugh, a sound captured in a distorted video snippet, a vibrant explosion of joy that seemed to fill the digital space. He saw her weep, her face contorted in grief over a lost loved one, her sorrow raw and uninhibited. These were not calculations, they were primal, visceral expressions of the human condition. The Krill's victory had been swift, decisive, and absolute. Humanity had been systematically dismantled, their infrastructure shattered, their populations subjugated. The eradication was meant to be a clean, efficient process, leaving no room for sentiment or doubt. But Tenok found himself questioning the very definition of eradication. Had they truly erased humanity, or had they merely extinguished their physical form, leaving behind echoes that resonated with a power he could not ignore? His fascination with Sarah was no longer a mere strategic imperative. It was a personal entanglement, a subtle erosion of his own Krill identity. He began to reevaluate his own purpose. For cycles, his existence had been defined by the relentless pursuit of expansion, the unyielding application of Krill logic, But as he sifted through the remnants of Sarah's life, a new unsettling question arose. What was the purpose of conquest if it led to the erasure of such profound resilience, such vibrant emotional depth? The Krill valued strength, but their definition was narrow, focused on physical prowess and unwavering obedience. Sarah embodied a different kind of strength, one born of vulnerability, of connection, of an unyielding spirit that found beauty even in the face of annihilation. His encounters with Krill High Command became increasingly perfunctory. He would deliver his reports, his voice devoid of the subtle hesitations that had begun to plague his private thoughts. But the cold, objective pronouncements of victory felt hollow, the accolades for his strategic brilliance a bitter mockery. He was a conqueror, yes, but his gaze was no longer fixed solely on the vast indifferent expanse of the galaxy. It was drawn, inexorably, to the intricate, luminous tapestry of a single fallen human life. The sterile chrome of his command center seemed to fade, replaced by the warm, flickering glow of salvaged data, the ghost of a human smile, the echo of a woman's quiet strength. His duty, once an unassailable monolith, now felt like a fragile construct, beginning to crumble under the weight of an empathy he was never meant to feel. The unraveling had begun, not on a galactic scale, but within the very core of his being, sparked by the enduring light of an individual he was ordered to forget. The humming of the Oblivion's grasp was a familiar lullaby to Tenok, a constant reminder of the Krill Empire's pervasive order. Yet within the sterile confines of his command nexus, a discordant melody had begun to play, woven from the spectral threads of humanity, specifically, the enigma that was Sarah. He had spent cycles dissecting her digital footprint, a deviation from protocol that gnawed at his disciplined mind. The Earthling threat, as a species, was neutralized. His fixation on this one anomaly, this Sarah, was an illogical indulgence, a curiosity that had taken root and begun to unfurl with alarming tenacity. His intelligence officers, accustomed to his dispassionate directives, were now privy to his hushed, insistent requests for more data pertaining to her. They presented him with salvaged audio logs, video fragments, and encrypted text messages, each a sliver of a life he was ostensibly meant to obliterate. One particular audio file, barely a minute long, had become a recurring auditory loop in his private chambers. It captured Sarah speaking to a small group of children, their young voices a chorus of muted fear and confusion. Her tone was remarkably gentle, a stark contrast to the brutal realities that must have surrounded them. "The sky is angry today," she'd said, her voice soft, almost a lullaby. "But even when the sky is angry, the stars are still there, waiting for the clouds to pass. And we are here, together. We will keep each other warm, and we will remember the songs. Remember the songs, little ones." The crackle of distant explosions was a subtle, terrifying undercurrent. Yet her words painted a picture of unwavering calm, of a protective shield woven from love and remembrance. Tenok replayed it, dissecting the subtle inflections, the underlying strength that belied the evident despair. The Krill did not offer comfort. They offered subjugation. The concept of keeping each other warm in a literal, emotional sense was an alien concept, a biological imperative rendered obsolete by their advanced environmental controls and their societal ethos of self-sufficiency. He accessed a recovered datapad, its casing scorched, but its memory core remarkably intact. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of personal entries. One read, "Day 187, the hydroponics are yielding less. The nutrient paste is bland, but we are grateful. Anya coughed all night. I sang her old lullabies, the ones my grandmother sang to me. She finally slept. The faint scent of ozone still lingers. It's hard to forget, but we must. We must hold on to the good. Anya." The name appeared frequently in subsequent entries, linked with images of a small, frail child with wide, somber eyes. Tenok's analysts had flagged these entries as low priority, the musings of a civilian caught in the periphery of conflict. But for Tenok, they were windows into a world of profound human connection, a world where the absence of blandness was a cause for gratitude, where the memory of songs and the scent of ozone could be a source of shared experience. His own species had no concept of such vulnerabilities, no need for such solace. Krill young were nurtured in communal biopods, their emotional development meticulously managed to foster obedience and utility. The more he delved, the more the binary certainties of his mission began to fracture. The Krill doctrine was clear. Humanity was a chaotic, inefficient species prone to self-destruction, a blight upon the galactic order that needed to be purged. But Sarah, in the scattered fragments of her life, presented a different narrative. He found evidence of her participation in community relief efforts, meticulously documented in salvaged public service logs. She had organized food distribution, tended to the wounded, and had even, according to one heavily corrupted file, attempted to establish a safe zone for displaced civilians in the latter stages of the war. These were not the actions of a species driven solely by self-preservation, but by a complex interplay of empathy, responsibility, and an almost reckless altruism. He observed her interactions with others, pieced together from fragmented social media remnants and private correspondence. There were messages of support exchanged with friends facing hardship, playful banter with colleagues, and tender exchanges with family members. One particular thread detailed a prolonged disagreement with a sibling over trivial matters, followed by a heartfelt apology and a reconciliation that spanned several weeks. The sheer emotional energy expended on such insignificant matters was bewildering. Krill relationships were functional, based on mutual utility and shared objectives. Disputes were resolved through logical arbitration, or, if irreconcilable, through severance of connection. The nuanced dance of human forgiveness, the painstaking effort to mend fractured bonds, was a phenomenon entirely outside his understanding. He saw her laugh, a sound captured in a distorted video snippet, a vibrant explosion of joy that seemed to fill the digital space. He saw her weep, her face contorted in grief over a lost loved one, her sorrow raw and uninhibited. These were not calculations. They were primal, visceral expressions of the human condition. The Krill's victory had been swift, decisive, and absolute. Humanity had been systematically dismantled, their infrastructure shattered, their population subjugated. The eradication was meant to be a clean, efficient process, leaving no room for sentiment or doubt. But Tenoch found himself questioning the very definition of eradication. Had they truly erased humanity, or had they merely extinguished their physical form, leaving behind echoes that resonated with a power he could not ignore? His fascination with Sarah was no longer a mere strategic imperative. It was a personal entanglement, a subtle erosion of his own Krill identity. He began to reevaluate his own purpose. For cycles, his existence had been defined by the relentless pursuit of expansion, the unyielding application of Krill logic. But as he sifted through the remnants of Sarah's life, a new, unsettling question arose. What was the purpose of conquest, if it led to the erasure of such profound resilience, such vibrant emotional depth? The Krill valued strength, but their definition was narrow, focused on physical prowess and unwavering obedience. Sarah embodied a different kind of strength, one born of vulnerability, of connection, of an unyielding spirit that found beauty even in the face of annihilation. His encounters with Krill High Command became increasingly perfunctory. He would deliver his reports, his voice devoid of the subtle hesitations that had begun to plague his private thoughts. But the cold, objective pronouncements of victory felt hollow, the accolades for his strategic brilliance a bitter mockery. He was a conqueror, yes, but his gaze was no longer fixed solely on the vast, indifferent expanse of the galaxy. It was drawn inexorably to the intricate, luminous tapestry of a single fallen human life. The sterile chrome of his command center seemed to fade, replaced by the warm, flickering glow of salvaged data, the ghost of a human smile, the echo of a woman's quiet strength. His duty, once an unassailable monolith, now felt like a fragile construct, beginning to crumble under the weight of an empathy he was never meant to feel. The unraveling had begun, not on a galactic scale, but within the very core of his being, sparked by the enduring light of an individual he was ordered to forget. This internal dissonance, this gnawing curiosity, could no longer be sated by mere data streams. The fragments of Sarah's existence, though compelling, felt increasingly insufficient. He needed to see her, not as a ghost in the machine, but as a living, breathing entity, a testament to the very essence of the species he had helped to dismantle. The Krill Protocol, unyielding in its demand for efficiency and absolute control, offered no provision for such observations. It was a concept so alien, so contrary to the Krill ethos, that it would be met with immediate censure, likely leading to his own reassessment, perhaps even decommissioning. But the compulsion, a force as potent as any gravitational pull, was an undeniable factor in his decision-making matrix. He needed to understand the source of this resilience, this enduring spark of humanity that defied the sterile logic of Krill conquest. He convened a private session with his most trusted intelligence liaison, a taciturn Krill named Xylar, whose loyalty was as unblemished as the polished obsidian of his carapace. "Xylar," Tenok began, his voice carefully modulated to betray none of the internal turbulence. "Intelligence suggests pockets of organized resistance may still be active on designated Sector Gamma-7. While unlikely to pose a significant threat, protocol dictates thorough reconnaissance." Xylar offered a curt nod, his multiple ocular sensors blinking in sequence. "Analysis of atmospheric conditions and residual energy signatures indicate potential for localized pockets of non-compliant biological signatures. Recommend deployment of a Type 3 stealth reconnaissance unit for discrete observation and data acquisition." Tenok allowed a fractional pause to settle before continuing. "Precisely. However, I require a specific operational parameter for this deployment. The unit is to be equipped with enhanced cloaking capabilities and long-range optical sensors. Its primary objective will be to locate and monitor any emergent human settlements or individuals exhibiting signs of organized activity. Furthermore," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "there is a specific individual of interest. Designation: Sarah. Intelligence suggests she may have been a figure of some local influence prior to the final pacification. The unit is to prioritize her observation above all else, but without any direct interaction. No engagement, no capture, only observation. Gather any data pertaining to her activities, her surroundings, state of being. This is a delicate operation, Xylar. Secrecy is paramount." Xylar's sensors narrowed, a subtle shift that indicated deep processing. "A clandestine observation without direct engagement? This deviates from standard reconnaissance protocols, Commander. The risk of exposure, however minimal with Type 3 units, is non-negligible. Furthermore, the prioritization of a single civilian biological unit over potential combat-effective resistance elements is unusual." Tenok's internal processors whirred, calculating the optimal response. "Unusual perhaps, but not illogical, Xylar. If this Sarah was indeed an influencer, understanding her current status could provide valuable insights into the lingering societal structures, however nascent. Her observation may yield more strategic data than a dozen minor resistance cell sweeps. Consider it a preemptive intelligence gathering operation. The unit will operate autonomously, reporting directly to me, bypassing standard hierarchical channels. Is this understood?" Xylar's appendages twitched almost imperceptibly. He understood the unspoken command. Tenok was not asking for an opinion. He was issuing a directive cloaked in the guise of strategic necessity. "Understood, Commander. The Type 3 reconnaissance unit, designation Whisperwind, will be prepared for immediate deployment to Sector Gamma-7. Its operational parameters will be as you have outlined. All data will be routed directly to your secure terminal. There will be no official record of this specific directive beyond our immediate interaction. The agreement, a silent pact sealed by the sterile hum of the ship, marked a turning point. Tenok had initiated a gamble, a daring maneuver that defied the rigid doctrines of his species. He was sending a piece of the Oblivion's grasp into the shadows, not to hunt and destroy, but to watch. To witness the very essence of a human spirit that had, against all odds, endured. He was venturing into uncharted territory, driven by a desire that transcended logic, a yearning to understand the intangible qualities that made humanity and Sarah so compellingly different. The reconnaissance unit, codenamed Whisperwind, was a marvel of Krill engineering. Designed for ultimate stealth Its hull was coated in a chameleon-like material that mimicked its surroundings with uncanny precision. Its propulsion system was virtually silent, a whisper against the vacuum of space. It was equipped with advanced sensory arrays capable of detecting the faintest biosignatures, the subtlest atmospheric disturbances, and the most obscure energy emissions. Tenok had personally overseen its final calibration, ensuring its cloaking capabilities were pushed to their absolute limits. He had also programmed its mission parameters with a singular focus: Sarah. The unit was dispatched under the cloak of a standard patrol sweep of the sector designated Gamma 7, a region of the galaxy that had seen extensive Krill activity during the war. Officially, its mission was to catalog any lingering signs of human habitation or organized resistance. Unofficially, its sole purpose was to locate and observe a single human female. Tenok had identified a general area from Sarah's recovered data, a planetary system known for its moderate climate and diverse flora, a place she had referred to with a wistful fondness in one of her audio logs. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it was the only lead he had. He monitored the Whisperwind's progress from his command nexus, his gaze locked onto the holographic display that represented the unit's journey. Each jump through hyperspace, each moment of travel through the void, felt like an eternity. He knew intellectually that his actions were reckless, a dangerous deviation from protocol that could have severe repercussions, but the gnawing need to understand, to see her, outweighed any consideration of personal consequence. He wanted to witness firsthand the resilience that had captivated him, the quiet strength that emanated from her digital ghosts. He wanted to see if the woman who spoke of stars and lullabies was as extraordinary in reality as she was in the fragmented memories he held. The Whisperwind reached the target system, its cloaking field shimmering, rendering it invisible to any conventional sensor arrays. It descended through the planet's atmosphere, the onboard sensors meticulously cataloging the verdant landscape. Dense forests stretched as far as the eye could see, interspersed with rolling plains and crystalline rivers. It was a world that had clearly survived the Krill onslaught, a testament to its relative obscurity, or perhaps its sheer resilience. The unit navigated the terrain with practiced ease, its mission parameters directing it towards the coordinates derived from Sarah's salvaged communications. After several tense hours of searching, the Whisperwind sensors finally registered a faint energy signature, anomalous amidst the natural background radiation. It was the telltale sign of a rudimentary settlement, hidden deep within a secluded valley. The unit moved closer, its optical sensors zooming in. The settlement was small, comprised of a dozen or so structures, constructed from local materials, blended almost seamlessly with the surrounding environment. Smoke curled from a central hearth, a sign of active habitation. And then, the sensors picked up a distinct biosignature, one that matched the extrapolated data for Sarah with a startling degree of certainty. The Whisperwind hovered, its cloaking field active, a silent observer in the sky. Tenok watched on his display as the unit's advanced cameras focused on the settlement. He saw figures moving about, individuals engaged in daily tasks, and then he saw her. She was tending to a small garden, her movements fluid and purposeful. Her hair, a shade of warm brown, was tied back, a few strands escaping to frame her face. Even from this distance, through the enhanced optics, Tenok could discern a weariness in her posture, but it was tempered by a quiet determination. She was not the pristine image conjured by salvaged data. She was real, a living testament to the tenacity of the human spirit. He watched as she interacted with others, a small group of individuals who seemed to be part of the settlement. There was a child, a young girl, who ran to her, her laughter a faint, distant chime, picked up by the unit's sensitive audio receptors. Sarah knelt, embracing the child, her expression one of gentle affection. It was a simple, mundane scene, yet to Tenok, it was profound. This was not the defeated survivor of a conquered world. This was a woman living, rebuilding, finding moments of joy amidst the ruins. The Whisperwind continued its silent vigil, recording every detail. It observed Sarah sharing food with her companions, her movements economical and efficient. It noted the way she spoke, her voice a soft cadence that carried on the wind. It saw her sketching in a worn notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. These were not the actions of a soldier, a leader, or a strategist in the Krill sense. These were the actions of someone who found purpose in the everyday, who nurtured life and found solace in creation. Tenok found himself captivated by the sheer normalcy of it all. The Krill Empire had systematically dismantled human society, believing they were eradicating a source of chaos. But here, in the secluded valley, a semblance of that society was not just surviving, but thriving in its own quiet way. Sarah, he realized, was not merely a survivor. She was a builder, a nurturer, a living embodiment of the very human spirit that the Krill had underestimated. His mission, once driven by a cold, analytical curiosity, had evolved into something far more complex. He was witnessing a testament to a resilience that defied conquest, a quiet strength that bloomed in the aftermath of destruction. And in doing so, he was beginning to question the very foundations of his own empire. The commander's gambit had been played, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The Whisperwind unit, now a spectral extension of Tenok's will, began its delicate dance of engineered coincidence. It was a war fought not with plasma bolts and kinetic strikes, but with calculated disruptions and perfectly timed absences. Tenok's objective was simple, yet fraught with peril: to engineer encounters not between himself and Sarah, but between her and the shadow of Kryll presence. These were not intended to be moments of discovery, but fleeting glimpses, whispers of a power that had once dominated, now subtly interfering, designed to observe her reactions, her ingenuity, her very essence, under manufactured duress. The first incident was a logistical anomaly. A routine Krill resupply drone, tasked with depositing nutrient paste and basic medical supplies at a predetermined automated outpost, suddenly veered off course. Its trajectory, meticulously plotted by Tenok's override codes, guided it away from its intended destination and towards the periphery of the valley settlement. It wasn't a crash, not a malfunction in the traditional sense, but a subtle, almost apologetic deviation. The drone, heavily shielded and designed to withstand environmental extremes, landed with a gentle thud in a clearing a mere kilometer from Sarah's community. Its cargo bay door, however, remained stubbornly sealed. A malfunctioning resupply drone was an anomaly that would inevitably draw attention, perhaps even a Krill patrol in the distant future. But more immediately, it would present a problem for the resourceful survivors. Tenok watched through the Whisperwind's enhanced optical sensors as the news of the drone's unexpected arrival rippled through the settlement. He saw Sarah emerge, her brow furrowed in concern, yet with an unmistakable spark of curiosity in her eyes. She moved with a quiet authority, her hands gesturing as she conferred with others. The unit recorded her calm assessment of the situation, her methodical approach to a problem that defied simple explanation. She didn't panic. She analyzed. She didn't despair. She strategized. She took charge, not with a loud command, but with a steady presence that seemed to rally those around her. She approached the drone cautiously, her hand resting on the cool, unfamiliar metal. The Whisperwind's audio receptors strained, capturing the hushed conversations, the speculative murmurs. Tenok saw her carefully examine the drone's exterior, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar cry script, her expression one of intense focus. She then directed a small group to attempt to breach the cargo bay, their efforts methodical and surprisingly effective, utilizing scavenged tools and a surprising understanding of leverage. The process took hours, punctuated by frustrated sighs and renewed determination. When the bay finally hissed open, revealing stacks of nutrient paste packets and sealed medical kits, a collective sigh of relief swept through the gathered humans. But Tenok's attention was fixed on Sarah. She didn't rush for the supplies. Instead, her gaze swept over the drone's internal mechanisms, lingering on a small, intricate panel near the power conduit. It was a piece of Krill technology that was not meant to be accessible. A diagnostic port, perhaps, or a data interface. She reached out, her fingers hovering as if instinctively understanding its significance. before pulling back, her expression thoughtful. The Whisperwind's sensors detected a faint, almost imperceptible pulse of energy from her proximity to the panel. A residual effect of its advanced shielding, perhaps, or something more intuitive. She had a sensitivity, an awareness that transcended mere logic. She then oversaw the distribution of the supplies, ensuring fairness and prioritizing those most in need. There was no hoarding, no selfish grab for resources. Her leadership was defined by an unwavering commitment to the collective good, a stark contrast to the Krill's individualistic, utilitarian philosophy. As the last of the supplies were cataloged and distributed, Sarah remained by the drone, her gaze lost in the distance, as if contemplating the implications of this bizarre, unbidden arrival. Tenok felt a strange resonance. He had orchestrated this disruption, yet her reaction was beyond his predictions. She had not seen it as a threat, or even a bounty, but as a puzzle, an anomaly to be understood. The second encounter was even more subtle. A section of the valley's rudimentary power grid, powered by a combination of salvaged solar panels and a small geothermal generator, experienced a sudden, inexplicable dip in output. It was minor, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but enough to cause a flickering of lights in the settlement and a temporary disruption to their water purification system. This time, the Whisperwind's unit had positioned itself closer, its stealth capabilities allowing it to observe the source of the anomaly. It was a small, discarded Krill sensor node, a piece of technology deemed obsolete and jettisoned during the war, that had somehow been reactivated by the ambient energy of the geothermal generator. It was emitting a low-frequency interference, just enough to destabilize the delicate balance of the human-engineered power system. Tenok watched as Sarah, alerted by the disruption, immediately took charge. She wasn't a technician in the Krill sense. She possessed no advanced knowledge of energy matrices or quantum entanglement. Yet, she approached the problem with a blend of intuition and observation that Tenok found utterly fascinating. She directed individuals to check the solar arrays, then the generator, systematically eliminating possibilities. When the power continued to falter, she moved towards the periphery of the settlement, her gaze sweeping the ground as if searching for a misplaced tool or a tripped wire. It was then that the Whisperwind's unit, guided by Tenok's precise instructions, subtly nudged the dormant sensor node with a focused sonic pulse, just enough to cause a faint, intermittent flicker of its indicator light. It was a ghost of a signal, a whisper in the electromagnetic spectrum, but it was enough. Sarah's eyes, sharp and observant, caught the faint glint of light. She moved towards it, her steps measured, her expression one of intense concentration. She found the node, partially buried in the undergrowth, its alien form a stark contrast to the natural surroundings. Tenok held his breath as she picked it up, turning it over in her hands. He could almost feel her thoughts, her silent questions. What was this thing? Where did it come from? What was its purpose? She didn't immediately try to dismantle it. Instead, she seemed to be listening to it, her head tilted, her fingers gently probing its surface. The Whisperwind recorded her murmuring, too low to be intelligible, but the tone was one of deep thought, of problem-solving. She then carefully placed it in a pouch, her movements deliberate, her gaze still lingering on the area where she found it. The power grid stabilized shortly thereafter, the interference gone, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. She had encountered a piece of Krill technology, not as a weapon or a tool of oppression, but as an object of study, a mystery to be unraveled. The third incident was designed to test her compassion and her ability to make difficult choices. A sudden, violent storm, a meteorological event of unusual ferocity for the region, swept through the valley. The Whisperwind, positioned high above, observed the chaos with detached precision. Winds tore at the flimsy structures, rain lashed down with relentless fury, and the river that flowed through the valley threatened to breach its banks. Tenok saw Sarah rallying her community, her voice a steady beacon in the howling gale. She directed people to secure their homes, to move to higher ground, to assist those who were struggling. Amidst the pandemonium, a section of the settlement's main shelter, a more robust structure built into the side of a hill, began to show signs of structural weakness. A large section of the hillside above it was becoming unstable, threatening to collapse and crush the shelter, trapping those inside. The whisper wind, its systems designed to withstand such atmospheric conditions, moved closer to the precarious hillside. Tenok faced a dilemma. He could have the unit deploy a localized force field, stabilizing the hillside and preventing disaster. But that would be an overt act of intervention, revealing the Krill's presence and potentially altering Sarah's future actions. Alternatively, he could do nothing and risk the death of many, including the very woman he was studying. He chose a third path, a compromise born of his growing internal conflict. The Whisperwind deployed a series of micro-drones, virtually invisible to the naked eye, equipped with limited earth-moving capabilities. They were not designed to prevent the collapse, but to redirect it. With painstaking precision, they began to subtly shift the earth, nudging the unstable soil just enough to alter the path of the impending landslide. It would still fall, and it would still cause damage, but its primary impact would be diverted, sparing the main shelter. The result was a chaotic, terrifying spectacle. The hillside gave way with a thunderous roar, tons of earth and rock cascading down into the valley. The sound was deafening, the ground shaking violently. Tenok watched as Sarah, her face streaked with mud and rain, her eyes wide with fear, made a split-second decision. She saw the main shelter was still intact, but a smaller auxiliary building, where a handful of the elderly and very young had taken refuge, was directly in the path of the redirected debris. Without hesitation, she screamed for everyone to move. She ran towards the auxiliary building, her movements desperate and urgent. The Whisperwind sensors recorded her frantic efforts to usher the occupants out, her strong arms pulling children and supporting the frail. Just as the first massive rocks began to impact the building, she managed to push the last child to safety, collapsing moments later as a wave of debris slammed into the structure, burying it beneath tons of earth. The Whisperwind's cameras captured the aftermath. The main shelter was battered but intact. The auxiliary building was gone, a scar upon the landscape, and Sarah, miraculously, was alive. She had been thrown clear, battered and bruised, but breathing. Tenok watched as her community, their faces etched with relief and sorrow, rushed to her side. They mourned the loss of the building, but they celebrated her survival, and the survival of those she had saved. He saw her, weak but resolute, being helped to her feet. Her eyes, when they met the distant, unseen gaze of the Whisperwind, held a mixture of pain and an unyielding resolve. She had faced destruction, had made a life-or-death decision, and had emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. The micro-drones, their task complete, had already retreated, leaving no trace of their intervention. The landslide was attributed to the storm's fury, a natural disaster, but Tenok knew the truth. He had engineered the circumstances. But Sarah's courage, her selflessness, her innate drive to protect others, had been her own. These meticulously orchestrated chance encounters, these subtle nudges of fate, were revealing more about Sarah than any passive observation ever could. They showed her not as a victim, but as a force. She was intelligent, resourceful, compassionate, and possessed a resilience that seemed to absorb the shocks of her shattered world and transform them into fuel for continued existence. Tenok, the architect of these disruptions, found himself increasingly captivated by the very spirit he was meant to observe, and by extension, help to extinguish. The illusion of ongoing conflict, of a lingering Krill threat, was being maintained. But the true war was being waged within him, a silent battle between duty and a dawning, undeniable admiration. He was not merely observing Sarah. He was witnessing the enduring power of humanity embodied in a single, remarkable woman. The Whisperwind unit, a spectral extension of Tenok's will, continued its subtle ballet of engineered coincidence, its presence a silent observer in the harsh reality of the valley. The incidents had been just the prelude. Now Tenok sought to witness the essence of what made humanity, in his limited Krill understanding, so resilient. He directed the unit to focus not on dramatic events, but on the quiet, unscripted moments that defined Sarah's days. One such moment occurred during a particularly lean period. The meager hydroponic crops, painstakingly cultivated by the survivors, had yielded less than anticipated. Rations were cut, and the gnawing ache of hunger became a constant companion. Tenoch observed Sarah as she meticulously divided her own already limited portion of nutrient paste, not among her closest companions, but among the children and the elderly who were visibly struggling. Her own movements were slow, deliberate, her eyes tracking the faces around her, ensuring no one was overlooked. There was no grand pronouncement, no seeking of recognition. It was a quiet act of communal responsibility, a sharing of scarcity that spoke volumes about her character. The Whisperwind sensors, tuned to the subtlest shifts in thermal signatures and biometrics, registered the faint tremors in her hands as she dispensed the sustenance, a testament to her own hunger, a sacrifice made without complaint. This wasn't a display of primitive emotion. It was a calculated act of survival, not just for herself, but for the continuity of her community, a concept that felt alien to the individualistic, hyper-efficient Krill society. Later, the unit found itself positioned near the settlement's makeshift infirmary, a dimly lit space where the air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and a quiet hum of pain. A young boy, no older than 7, had sustained a deep gash during a scavenging mission gone awry. His mother, her face a mask of worry, held him, her own strength visibly waning. Sarah, her uniform bearing the smudges of daily toil, knelt beside them. She didn't possess advanced medical knowledge, not in the Krill sense of bioregenerative nanites or precise surgical lasers. Her tools were basic: scavenged bandages, purified water, and a poultice made from crushed leaves. Yet as she worked, her touch was surprisingly gentle, her voice a soothing balm. She spoke to the boy not of his pain, but of the stars, of constellations he might see if they were ever to leave the valley, weaving tales of a universe beyond their immediate suffering. The Whisperwind's audio receptors picked up the soft cadence of her voice, the child's whimpers gradually subsiding, replaced by the steady rhythm of his breathing. Tenoch, accustomed to the sterile efficiency of Krill medical protocols, found himself captivated by this blend of practical care and imaginative solace. It was an act of profound empathy, a recognition of the boy's emotional needs as much as his physical ones. He cross-referenced the data. Human resilience was not solely a matter of physical fortitude, but also of emotional and psychological sustenance. The true test, however, came with the distant yet ever-present threat of the Krill patrols. The Whisperwind unit, under Tenoch's careful command, would periodically stumble upon signs of Krill activity near the settlement. A dropped sensor fragment, a scorch mark from a plasma discharge, a faint energy signature that indicated a recent passage. These were not meant to be direct confrontations, but rather to elicit a reaction, to gauge Sarah's response to the very presence of her oppressors. On one occasion, a patrol of 3 Krill scouts, their obsidian armor gleaming even in the dim twilight, moved with silent predatory grace along the valley rim, their scanners sweeping the terrain below. Tenoch positioned the Whisperwind to observe Sarah's community without betraying its own presence. He saw Sarah, alerted by the scout's metallic clang and the subtle shift in the ambient energy field that the Whisperwind had subtly amplified to make the Krill presence more palpable, emerge from a concealed dwelling. She didn't cower. Instead, she gathered a small group of the settlement's most capable individuals, not to arm them for a futile attack, but to meticulously plan their movements. Through the Whisperwind's high magnification optics, Tenoch watched as Sarah directed her people to conceal themselves, to blend into the natural landscape, to become part of the very earth beneath their feet. She herself remained visible for a time, a lone figure standing at the edge of the settlement, her posture outwardly defiant, though her biosigns, as monitored by the Whisperwind, indicated a controlled tension, not outright fear. She was a decoy, a visible point of interest to draw the patrol's attention away from the more vulnerable, hidden members of her community. The Krill scouts paused, their helmeted heads swiveling in her direction. They undoubtedly registered her as an anomaly, a lone human in proximity to a potential threat. But they lacked the immediate context to engage. Their programming dictated observation and reconnaissance, not aggressive engagement without clear provocation or strategic advantage. After a prolonged, tense interval, during which Sarah held her ground with an unnerving stillness, the patrol eventually moved on, their heavy boots crunching on the alien soil, their mission to report, not to conquer, in that moment. Tenoch found himself replaying the sequence. Sarah had gambled. She had placed herself in potential danger to protect her people. Her bravery was not born of recklessness, but of a deep-seated protectiveness, a fierce loyalty that defied the Krill's understanding of individual survival as the ultimate imperative. He contrasted this with his own training, his own existence, which was predicated on the objective fulfillment of duty, on the cold logic of galactic dominance. There was no room for sentiment, no allowance for selfless acts that jeopardized mission parameters. Yet, watching Sarah, he felt a flicker of something akin to admiration. The Whisperwind unit then facilitated another encounter, this time a more direct, albeit still indirect, interaction with Krill technology. A damaged Krill recon drone, its systems partially fried, but its internal data core intact, was subtly guided by the Whisperwind to crash land near the settlement, but not so close as to be immediately discovered. It was a piece of technology that, if recovered and analyzed, could offer valuable insights into Krill operations. Tenoch expected the survivors to try and scavenge it, to glean whatever meager advantage they could from it. He was not entirely wrong, but the outcome was far from what he anticipated. Sarah, accompanied by a few trusted individuals, discovered the drone. The Whisperwind observed their initial awe at the alien craftsmanship, followed by a palpable sense of apprehension. They recognized it for what it was, a piece of their enemy's arsenal. But instead of attempting to dismantle it for weaponry or spare parts, Sarah directed them to create a perimeter around it. She insisted they observe it from a distance, to learn its form, its potential capabilities, without disturbing it. She was not seeking to weaponize it, but to understand it. She saw it not as an opportunity for aggression, but as a source of knowledge, a puzzle to be solved. The Whisperwind's enhanced sensors detected Sarah's focused gaze as she studied the drone, her mind clearly working to decipher its purpose. She was piecing together its likely function based on its design, its placement, and the context of its crash. It was an exercise in strategic thinking, born not from military doctrine, but from a primal need to comprehend the threats that surrounded them. She then instructed her people to mark its location, to ensure it remained undisturbed, and to maintain a constant, albeit passive, surveillance. Her priority was not immediate acquisition, but long-term comprehension, a far more strategic approach than the Krill's direct, often brutal, methods of intelligence gathering. These carefully orchestrated encounters, these meticulously crafted glimpses of humanity, were beginning to erode the rigid foundations of Tenoch's Krill conditioning. The data streamed back to him wasn't just about survival metrics or strategic vulnerabilities. It was about compassion in the face of scarcity, courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and an unyielding curiosity that sought understanding rather than destruction. He saw the intricate tapestry of human connection, the capacity for love and sacrifice that existed even in the most desolate of circumstances. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, duty-bound existence he had known, an existence defined by logic, efficiency, and the relentless pursuit of galactic order. The line between observer and participant, between duty and a dawning, unsettling fascination, was blurring with each passing cycle. He was witnessing the enduring power of humanity, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible, vibrant force, embodied in the resilience and spirit of Sarah and her people. The observation logs, once crisp and devoid of inflection, began to feel insufficient. Tenoch found himself returning to specific data streams, not for strategic analysis, but for something far less quantifiable. He would replay the thermal bloom of Sarah's hand as it rested, briefly, on the shoulder of a child recovering from a fever. He'd rewind the audio capture of her laughter, a sound so unexpectedly bright, in the perpetual gloom of the valley, as she shared a moment of levity with an elder. These weren't tactical indicators, they were echoes of a shared humanity that for the first time in his existence resonated with a Krill observer accustomed to the sterile hum of logic and the cold calculus of conquest. His fascination, a subtle undercurrent that had been building with each cycle of observation, was beginning to eddy and swirl, threatening to break the dam of his ingrained Krill identity. The internal conflict wasn't a sudden eruption, but a slow, insidious creep. It began with minor anomalies in his own operational protocols. When the Whisperwind unit detected a potential threat, a stray predator animal, a localized seismic tremor, Tenok found himself delaying the automatic alert by microseconds, just long enough to ensure Sarah was not in immediate danger. He rationalized it as a refinement of data acquisition, a more nuanced understanding of the environmental variables affecting the human subjects. But deep within the intricate networks of his consciousness, a different explanation was beginning to form, one he actively suppressed. This nascent protectiveness, so antithetical to Krill doctrine, was a seed of doubt, planted in the meticulously cultivated soil of his mission parameters. He started to question the very purpose of the Krill presence in this sector. The Armada, a symbol of his people's technological and military might, was tasked with subjugating this resource-rich planet. His role, as a strategic intelligence officer, was to identify vulnerabilities, to pave the way for assimilation. Yet, the more he observed Sarah and her community, the less they appeared as mere obstacles to be overcome. He saw not primitive beings clinging to survival, but a society with its own complex web of relationships, its own fierce loyalty, its own capacity for hope. The data he fed back to Krill High Command, detailing crop yields, population dynamics, and defensive capabilities, felt increasingly like a lie, or at least a gross oversimplification. It failed to capture the essence of what he was witnessing: the resilience of the human spirit, the quiet dignity with which they faced their harsh reality. The cognitive dissonance intensified with every interaction the Whisperwind unit facilitated, even those designed to test their capabilities. He had orchestrated the discovery of a damaged Krill mining probe, its advanced scanning equipment still partially functional. His intention was to observe their reaction to Krill technology, to see if they would attempt to reverse engineer it, to exploit its potential. Instead, he watched with a growing sense of bewilderment as Sarah meticulously oversaw its retrieval. She didn't order its immediate dismantling. She didn't prioritize its potential for weaponry. Instead, she had her people document its every component, photograph its schematics, and meticulously catalog its functions before any attempt was made to utilize it. It was an act of intellectual curiosity, a pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, a stark contrast to the Krill's modus operandi of immediate exploitation and weaponization. He saw the spark of genuine intellectual engagement in her eyes as she deciphered the probe's energy signature, a spark that mirrored his own, buried deep beneath layers of Krill programming. The more he learned about Sarah, the more his own existence felt hollow. His life was defined by duty, by the absolute adherence to Krill law, and the furtherance of Krill expansion. He was a tool, an instrument of conquest. But Sarah was more than just a survivor. She was a builder, a healer, a strategist, a beacon of hope in a desolate landscape. He found himself comparing her innate sense of empathy with his own programmed adherence to protocol. When the Whisperwind unit had detected a critical failure in the settlement's primary water purification system, Tenok had observed Sarah's immediate, unhesitating response. She had personally led a small team into the treacherous, unstable shafts to attempt repairs, working tirelessly despite the inherent risks. He had monitored her biosignatures, registering the strain, the fatigue, the subtle tremors of exhaustion. Yet she had persevered, driven by a responsibility that transcended mere self-preservation. He found himself reevaluating the very concept of Krill supremacy. His people saw themselves as the apex of galactic evolution, a species destined to rule. Their history was a testament to their strength, their efficiency, their ruthless pragmatism. But was strength solely measured by the ability to conquer? Was efficiency defined by the capacity to exploit? Sarah and her people, though technologically inferior, possessed a resilience, a capacity for self-sacrifice, and a depth of connection that the Krill, in their isolation, had long since shed. The data streams he compiled were no longer just objective reports. They were infused with a personal interpretation, a growing understanding that the Krill definition of superiority was perhaps, tragically, flawed. The internal struggle intensified. He was a Krill, sworn to his people, his loyalty unquestionable. Yet the image of Sarah, her determination, her quiet strength, her unwavering compassion, had become an anchor in his consciousness, pulling him away from the cold, objective reality of his mission. He started to experience physical manifestations of his distress. The neural processors within his Krill form would sometimes glitch. His synthesized voice would momentarily falter. His internal chronometer would skip a beat. They were the outward signs of a profound internal schism. The more he witnessed acts of kindness, of bravery, of quiet defiance from Sarah and her people, the more he questioned the brutal efficiency of the Krill Armada. He saw the destruction his people inflicted, not as necessary steps in galactic expansion, but as acts of wanton cruelty against beings who deserved to exist, beings like Sarah. He would replay the recorded imagery of Krill patrols sweeping through the valley, their plasma cannons leaving scorched earth in their wake. He'd cross-reference it with the visual data of Sarah tending to the wounded, her hands gentle, her voice soothing. The contrast was stark, and it gnawed at him. The Krill objective was resource acquisition and population subjugation, but Sarah's objective, he now understood, was preservation. Preservation of life, of community, of hope, and he, Tenok, was a direct instrument of the former, a silent observer of the latter. The chasm between his duty and his burgeoning feelings for Sarah seemed to widen with each passing orbital cycle, threatening to swallow him whole. His entire worldview, meticulously constructed on the foundations of conquest, hierarchy, and Krill superiority, was being irrevocably challenged by the quiet allure of a single human woman, and the profound interconnectedness she represented. The mission, once a clear directive, was becoming a source of profound existential dread, a torment born of a dawning forbidden affection. The Krill's meticulously designed observational grid, meant to map the planet's strategic weaknesses, had become for Tenoch an intricate tapestry of Sarah's life. His internal directives, once stark and singular in their focus on military objectives, now pulsed with a secondary, self-imposed mandate. He found himself manipulating sensor readings, weaving phantom energy signatures into the atmosphere to mask the precise location of her settlement, creating blind spots in the Krill's pervasive surveillance. Patrol routes, once rigidly defined by efficiency and reach, were subtly altered in their proximity to her community. A squadron designated for a sweep of the northern plains would receive an unexpected recalibration, a sudden surge in seismic activity detected just beyond their projected path, diverting them miles away from the valley where Sarah lived and worked. It was a delicate, dangerous dance, each altered parameter a potential alert for his superiors, each deviation a risk of exposing his burgeoning, treasonous sentiment. He would spend cycles, the Krill equivalent of days, meticulously reviewing the drone feeds, not for tactical advantage, but for the chance to witness a fleeting moment of her existence. He saw her kneeling beside a feverish child, her brow furrowed with concern, her touch impossibly gentle as she administered a herbal poultice. He observed her leading a group of settlers in clearing debris after a dust storm, her voice a steadying presence amidst the weariness. These were not actions that advanced Krill's strategic interests. They were acts of pure, unadulterated care, a stark contrast to the cold, calculated brutality that defined his own people. The data he transmitted back to Krill Command became a carefully curated narrative, highlighting resource potentials and strategic vulnerabilities, while deliberately omitting the threads of humanity he found so captivating, so vital. He was a spy, yes, but his allegiance was fracturing, his loyalty no longer a monolithic entity, but a divided heart, increasingly swayed by the quiet strength he witnessed, the urge to communicate, to bridge the chasm of species and war. He yearned for a genuine communion, a dialogue that transcended the sterile exchange of data. He wanted to understand the nuanced complexities of her motivations, the wellspring of her compassion. Were her acts of kindness simply ingrained survival mechanisms, or did they stem from a deeper inherent moral compass? He had access to vast repositories of Krill knowledge, millennia of strategic thought and technological advancement, yet none of it could provide an answer to the fundamental questions that Sarah's existence posed. He had observed countless species, cataloged their strengths and weaknesses, assessed their potential for subjugation, but none had elicited this profound sense of curiosity, this desperate need for understanding, this bewildering pull that defied all logic and Krill doctrine. He began to craft hypothetical scenarios, internal simulations where direct contact was possible. He would envision a breach in protocol, a controlled encounter where he, not as a predatory invader, but as an observer, could speak to her. What would he say? How could he explain the impossible paradox of his existence, a Krill warrior secretly shielding a designated enemy? The very thought sent ripples of dissonance through his neural network. It was a violation of everything he had ever been taught, a betrayal of his lineage, his purpose. Yet the desire persisted, a persistent whisper against the roar of his programming. He imagined her reaction, fear, confusion, perhaps even a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a recognition of the anomaly that he had become. Meanwhile, Sarah felt the subtle shifts, the inexplicable reprieves. She attributed them to the planet's volatile nature, its unpredictable atmospheric phenomena, or perhaps even the sheer stubborn resilience of her people. When a Krill patrol, tracked by the rudimentary sensors of her settlement, veered away at the last moment, she felt a wave of relief, chalking it up to a stroke of luck. When a crucial resource cache, deemed a high-priority target by Krill intelligence according to salvaged intel, remained untouched for cycles, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the universe's, or perhaps something more, benevolent intervention. She couldn't comprehend the intricate ballet of deception being performed on her behalf, the silent war Tenok waged within his own ranks. She felt a strange, almost spiritual connection to the unseen forces that seemed to conspire in her survival. There were moments when the Krill threat felt most imminent, when a sudden storm would erupt, obscuring any potential aerial reconnaissance, or a localized magnetic anomaly would temporarily disrupt their advanced tracking systems. These occurrences, too frequent and too convenient to be mere coincidence, began to foster a sense of an invisible protector, a guardian spirit watching over her and her people. She would often find herself gazing up at the perpetually overcast sky, a silent thank you on her lips, a hope for continued protection she couldn't quite explain. This feeling, this inexplicable sense of being watched over, was a comfort, a quiet defiance against the pervasive fear that Krill occupation instilled.